So what I wanted to talk about was just a little bit of introduction, about, kind of what's happening, in the industry today. And I know, Suzanne covered a lot of that, and I'll cover a little bit more. But, Heath has been in business 90 years. Carolyn talked to you earlier about, her grandfather that started the company. And we were New England based at that time. Actually had our corporate office was in Wellesley Hills initially, and then Stoughton, Massachusetts, up until the early 90s. And then he had an R&D facility actually outside of Detroit in Michigan. And so we had some roots there. And so we moved to Houston in 92, 93 timeframe, just because from a business environment, the oil and gas industry was in Houston. It was more central to the U.S., east and west. It was difficult, in taxes and everything else in Massachusetts. So the idea was to move to Houston. It was probably, a good idea, at the time. And so, since that time, Milton, took it away from his grandfather, ran the company up until his death. He was active actually into his mid-80s, working for the company. And still, he was the PR, went out and about, had attended trade shows quite regularly into his, early, late 70s, early 80s. And so very active within the industry, loved the industry. And so, from that, Carolyn, obviously, as the daughter, took over as third generation, and then her son is actually here, Sean Haig. Sean here somewhere, but he's fourth generation, Heath family, Carolyn's son. So it's fun times. It's really exciting. I always said that on the leak detection side, you'll think that if you read newspapers and everything that's going on about methane emissions as a greenhouse gas, you'd think leak detection just started in the last 5 years. That no one had been doing anything until the last 5 years, and all of a sudden, wow, we got to find leaks. And I said, we've been finding leaks for 90 years. Granted, early on, it wasn't technology. A lot of that was vegetation and going around looking for dead plants and trees and bushes, as vegetation survey, and that evolved into the instrumentation that we have today, as it's moved along. I said it was always kind of behind the scenes. We were always kind of behind. Nobody really knew we were there. We were going house to house, service to service, meter to meter. If people were home, they'd ask and say, what are you doing? We're looking at, do I have a leak? No, we're doing the whole neighborhood. We're not just here for you, we're doing the entire neighborhood. And so the people that happened to be home when we were there would get educated on leak detection and why we're doing it, from a safety standpoint. But if they weren't there and they were at work, they didn't know we were there, and it was done. And that was part of their service by their local utility company. It was a requirement from a regulation to go out and do that from a safety standpoint. And it just happened, and it was been done, and it has been done, quite frequently, ever since. And so it's just one of those things. Now we're seeing more people because with, since post-COVID, it's a different world now, and people are home-based a lot. So people are home more often. And so now they're starting to see people come to their house for leak survey or routine atmospheric corrosions or 811 locates. They're home now, and all of a sudden they're ring doorbells and cameras and whatever are going on. Somebody's at our house. And so now there's more awareness out there of what's going on, but the idea is still the same, is educating the public on why you're there, what you're doing, what the purpose of it is, and its safety and its environment now. So these things have changed, but a lot of new regulations that are coming out, and I'll cover some of them, and you'll hear today from the federal government. We have a representative, Bill Lowry, here, and so you'll hear from him, about the federal regulations, and then Paul McGuire is here from the state perspective, and so you'll hear some of the initiatives in the state of Nevada and what they're doing. And so there's a lot happening. There's probably more regulations, more changes in the last, say, 5-10 years than there was in the previous 30. So a lot happening in that space. The social pressures, Suzanne talked about that, of what's happening there, and it's education. It's people that just don't know. They have no earthly idea how gas, is developed out there. They just hear things about fracking. They don't really understand, unless you're in that business, to understand how gas goes from production to gathering to processing to transmission to gate station at the city gate and in. They just know that, when I need gas, it happens. I tell my neighbors all the time, I said, when our power goes out especially, they'll say, boy, the power's been going out a lot lately. They'll come home and your microwave's flashing or your clock's flashing and, geez, electric went out again. And I'll ask the neighbors, I said, when's the last time you lost gas? And they're thinking about it. They go, I don't think I've ever lost gas. I said, exactly, that's the reason. That is something, is that it's very rare. And I live in Houston, and it's, a lot of, environmental, particularly hurricanes and stuff and seasons, but never lost gas, always had gas, and so, but I lose electricity quite regularly. And so ask people, say, when's the last time you lost gas? Most of them will not remember when the last time they didn't have gas. And so it's there, it works, it's functional, and it's safe, and the unfortunate part is, we get front page news, when we do have incidents, and although they're far and few apart, they do happen. And when they do, it gets a lot of news media. And then, then it's the PR's time at the utilities to then, go and explain and understand what all happened and why. And so that's, it's always been a difficult thing. I always kind of compare it back to, it's a form of transportation. Obviously, natural gas regulated under DOT. I said the automobile industry, there's 43,000 people killed every year in automobile accidents. It's very unfortunate, it's very horrific, but it happens. But it's become an accepted risk. People know when you get in the car, it could happen. But people are not giving up their driver's licenses. They're not giving up their cars because of that. Unfortunately, it is an accepted risk. On the natural gas side, though, that accepted risk is zero. They don't expect any fatality in our industry, and that's kind of how we run the industry, is we don't want any. And it's a form of transportation, pipelines, but it's a different risk approach. It's a zero. We do not want any fatalities or injuries within our industry. And so that's kind of the difference, both regulated by the Department of Transportation, the highways, the automobile industry. And unfortunately, we have, from time to time, those incidents, and it is horrific. It's terrible. We don't want, when we want, no loss of life and no fatalities, that's what we strive for. So the other thing is new technology, and Suzanne talked about that. There's a lot of new technology out there. And I'm not just talking on the leak detection side, which is what you're going to hear a lot about over the next 2 days on that, but even on materials, piping materials, different types of plastics, different types of valves and fittings, and so on. It's continually evolving with new technology that's out there. Not just from a cost standpoint, some of it's cost, a lot of it's safety, some of it's life of the system. How long will these materials last? And we've gone through a number of these, from cast iron pipes to bare steel pipe to even in the infancy days of legacy plastics, when we experimented around a lot of the companies with PVCs and some of these ABS and some of these other plastics that just didn't quite work the way we wanted them to. And then we evolved into polyethylene. But there's a lot of work being done in new technology, and how do we get, products and services from vendors out there to provide these to make a safer, more economical system, and even on the installation side. All kinds of new practices with directional drilling and keyholes and all kinds of things to reduce costs. How do we do that? How do we replace infrastructure, and how do we do it, to limit disruption of our city streets and so on, and reduce the costs for what costs are to open up a trench now. So new capital and market entrance. We're seeing a lot of new acquisitions out there. There's a lot of private equity money. There's a lot of venture capital, not just you'll see every day now, particularly on the upstream side of the business, and a lot of these production companies, there's mega mergers and acquisitions. It's almost daily now. You'll see them. We're talking billions with a B, of acquisitions that are happening out there. So there's a lot of movement, a lot of transition, a lot of outside money coming in, a lot of this investment in these fields and stuff to produce gas. And then obviously we've seen the same in the midstream and the transmission side, with a lot of acquisitions and mergers in those spaces as well with some of those companies. And then obviously on the LDC, there was a big push, from electric, the Dukes, the Dominions, the Southern companies. There was a number of those that, got in and started acquiring electric distribution. And so there's the combination now. We have a lot of combo utilities. There's very few left standalone gas, like Atmosphere or Southwest Gas, or a number of those that are not associated with electric. And so there's a different mix out there. And then there's a lot of issues with the municipal side. And I mentioned that earlier. Most of those are in the southeast and here in the south, but a lot of municipal gas. And it's a challenge for them as well, because they don't necessarily have the resources of a larger gas utility with the money to fund a lot of these things, or even the personnel to have engineers and so on staff. And so there's going to be a lot of change out there with even some of those utilities and how they ultimately survive or get taken over. So a lot happening in that space. On Heath's approach, there's a number of things that you'll hear over the next couple of days, but a lot of it is data. I can remember for years when we went out and did leak surveys, everything was paper, total paper. We went out, paper maps, we went out with paper leak sheets, we filled out everything on paper, and the industry pushed paper around. Paper, out in the field, with sweat and coffee and stains all over the paper and the maps, and those got pushed back, into the maps and records, and they got put in files. They put stuff out on crew trucks to make repairs. They filled out the backs of them. They brought them back in. They put them in files. Everything was paper. That's obviously changed now. We're pushing the paper around. Most people have, GIS systems now for mapping and records, and have digitized whatever paper records they've had and put those all in GIS. So the information's available to people in the field now at their fingertips, on their phones. They have a lot of detail, and it gets better every day as they dig up pipe, verify the pipe, the age of the pipe, the type of pipe, and they add that into the database. It gets better every day. And so it's data-driven now. There's risk-based management, where people looking at that type of pipe materials within their area based on leak frequency, and what type of, leak counts they have in these areas, and to go above and beyond what the regulations are, knowing that there's risk potential there until they can get that pipe replaced. And that's one thing the public doesn't understand. You have an incident, the public thinks, well, why didn't the gas company change that pipe out? Why do they still have it in the ground? And they don't understand how many miles of pipe that you have and where that infrastructure is located, and it's leak survey management, and so it's over time you're replacing it, but you can't replace it overnight. And then also the ratepayer ends up paying for that in rates anyway, so how do you do that balancing act to keep natural gas affordable to the ratepayer, but at the same time allow you to go out and do the work that you need to do in replacing it? So that's always been a challenge. On the new technology side, and we'll talk about a number of this out there, and a lot of it is, this advanced mobile leak detection. That's the new buzzword out there, and there's been a lot of different systems there on the market, not just here domestically in the US, but worldwide, of technology to go out there, and how do we cover our system quicker, faster, to do more coverage more frequently, and then not leave leaks out there. And I'm meaning not just the serious leaks, but now the pressure's on through the public. When it came out, and you've got groups out there like Environmental Defense Fund and some of these large environmental groups that are generally not pro-fossil fuel. And so these groups out are constantly putting pressure in Washington on regulators. And there's not just them, but there's a number of them out there that do it constantly, to try to eliminate natural gas. And so the pressure's put on there, and there's been pressure on leak management when they understood and found out that, hey, utilities don't fix all their leaks, and what do you mean they don't fix them all? No, they grade them. They have a grading process, where they fix the bad ones first, they monitor the middle ones, and then the grade 3 leaks, they don't repair at all. And so that, of course, we never have. It's always been leak management. We do it by, based on potential risk and hazard. And so when a lot of the environmentalists got in there, that's what caused a lot of the pressure that we see today to fix all the leaks, and not have a backlog of grade 3s and not manage them at some point in time to either replace the pipe or, fix the leaks. So there's a lot of changes in that space. And then we'll talk about our turnkey approach. About how we go about using the advanced mobile leak detection. So what's happening in the market? I'm not going to get through all of it in detail because some of that's going to get discussed by Bill. But there are a lot of things that are happening, and there's a lot of money being thrown around. There's a lot of money coming out of Washington for a lot of these programs. And so there's the PHMSA LDAR NPRM, which is the leak detection and repair notice of proposed rulemaking. And they had the GPAC meeting it was in Washington, outside of Washington, the last week it was right after Thanksgiving. And so I was there myself. There was several other people in the room here that were there as well. And then, most of the industry was represented there. But this is a big change in what's happening now in the current, leak detection and repair. They didn't get everything done. They thought they'd have everything done in that 5-day period, and they got about half of it done through. And I know Mary Polkovich at one time actually sat on GPTC several years ago, or GPAC, I'm sorry. And so it takes a long time. You've got a room of industry people and in various knowledge of expertise, but not everybody knows everything about everything. And then you put 3 or 4 attorneys in there too, and things don't get done quickly. There's a lot of wordsmithing, and so it takes a long time. It's painfully slow. But it's good conversation, good things. A lot of lobbying happens at coffee breaks and stuff, that aren't around. And so it's a lot of texting. I probably text on my phone more in a 5-day period than in my entire life, with different people. So it's just a lot happening. So that'll convene again the end of March, and hopefully they'll finish that, because it's not just the leak detection and repair, but they put the class locations in there as well to address that. So that's going on. There's safety of gas distribution pipelines. There's another proposed rulemaking with that, and that came out of Merrimack, which was the overpressurization up in New England. And there's a lot happening in that on pressure control and pressure relief, and how that's happened so that can't happen again, where they went in on a low pressure system on an upgrade conversion and put a medium or high pressure over on a low pressure system. And these low pressure homes did not have regulators at each house, so pressure gas, they think it went up as high as 52 pounds, into a low pressure inches of water column system, so without a regulator. So that not a good situation. And so there's a lot in that happening. The next one is the EPA. There's things going on there, and some affect LDC. A lot of this is more mid and upstream side, but you'll hear from Roy Massengill will speak tomorrow morning about the EPA, because some of it does, but they've got several EPA regulations, the Quad OB, Quad OC, Appendix K, and he'll talk about some of that and how that affects even on the LDC side. There's the Biden infrastructure bill. Everybody's heard about that. And there's a big piece in there on these orphan and abandoned wells. And so there's been a lot of talk out there that there's a lot of orphan and abandoned wells. And this dates back to the late 1800s, some in the early 1900s, when the records weren't real good. And this was before horizontal drilling. This was just conventional vertical, shallow type wells. And so, areas in these Texas, Pennsylvania, Ohio, some of these oil producing areas, Oklahoma, had thousands and thousands. They don't even really know how many there are. It could be as high as 3.2 million, they think, out there. And these are wells that never really don't have ownership anymore because of, they pass through different companies, and some of them might have been plugged. I mean, back in the day, they'd take a 20-pound sack of concrete, pour it down the well, take a 5-gallon bucket of water, and that's plugged well. That's how some of that was done. Some, they took tree stumps. It was 6-inch casing. They cut a 6-inch tree, cut the trunk of the tree, and pounded in the well, and that was capped. And so, obviously, over time, that tree rotted, and the well started percolating in some areas, if it was a active production facility, and all of a sudden now we got a well leaking. And so part of this was to go out and identify these, and so the government was given money to state programs, because most of the oil producing states in the country had programs, but they were state funded, and they could only do several wells a year. And so the idea was, let's find out how many we actually have, let's go out, catalog them, find them, and then actually put a program together of those that are leaking to go out and plug those wells, and at least they have records. And then at the same time, quantify these wells so we know how much actual natural gas is leaking and how much is being contributed as a greenhouse gas out there. And so there's a lot of that happening. So there's a lot of people involved in that type business. Hydrogen, I know it was mentioned earlier, Suzanne mentioned, is another one is on the hydrogen. More, there's a B again, $7 billion was just released, and I'm just talking in the United States for these hydrogen hubs. And I know we've got several people here from Europe in the audience, and Europe's probably 4 or 5 years ahead of the United States right now from hydrogen development. They're a little different, and because they don't have natural gas production per se, those areas that did in Europe are no longer producing gas, so they rely on gas from outside sources. And then obviously with all the things going on in Russia and Ukraine, and that's put a kind of a hamper on some of that. And so, it's coming from different sources, the Middle East, the US, and Suzanne mentioned that on the LNG side. And so, a lot happening there. And so people are looking at what else is hydrogen as a means to put in the pipe, whether it's 100%, whether it's a blend of hydrogen within our natural gas, to look at reduction of methane emissions and then part on the CO2 on the burn side. So a lot happening there and a lot of money being thrown at that. There's the PHMSA R&D. They just had their R&D meeting last year as well. And some of the topics, the key topics, again, are leak detection, CO2, carbon dioxide, hydrogen, threat detection, which is third-party damage, which obviously is a big one, and then anomaly detection. And so those are the key buzzwords on the PHMSA's R&D side, where they want new concepts, new ideas, new technology, and PHMSA is willing to fund some of those projects to try to innovate technology development out there to aid into how do we do it better than the way we're doing it today. So again, more money being thrown at that, and Bill might touch on some of that. PHMSA, the Natural Gas Distribution Infrastructure Safety and Modernization Grant, here's another $1 billion was put out, and this is a 5-year program. The only people that can get this is municipal systems, and so it's not going for investor-owned. These are municipal-type gas systems, which can range from as big as Philadelphia Gas Works, that 500,000 customers, down to San Antonio is actually municipal, all the way down to Freedom, Oklahoma, which I think is 12 customers. So you've got a number. There's 750 municipal gas systems out there. And so as mentioned earlier, some of these, it's more difficult for them because they're small in a lot of cases. The good majority of them are under 50,000 connections. And so, how do they fund pipe replacement and some of these other things? And so that's what was set up as a grant out there. And so there's the first one was $196 million awarded, and 23 is $392 million, and that should be announced here in the next month or two under who got that. They can also apply that money to leak detection technology. Anything to reduce leaks, improve safety, and limit environmental risk is how that money can be applied. Environmental Defense Fund, I talked about that. Them and several others now are starting to intervene on rate cases. And so when utilities are going before their Public Utility Commission for rate, a lot of is happening now is a lot of environmental type companies are getting involved and intervening in some of those rate cases. And a lot of it is, how are these utilities controlling their loss and unaccounted for and their emissions, and how is all that happening? And part of their leverage of getting these increases is to, either do more pipe replacement or more, proactive leak detection, or however to reduce emissions. And so there's a lot of that happening. And then there's other opportunities on the renewable natural gas side. And so it's not just hydrogen, it's how do we prevent other methane sources from being emitted into the atmosphere? How do we capture some of that? So there's more money being spent at landfills. How do we, contain whether liners or putting in collection and venting systems, to capture that methane and then take that methane and put it in the pipeline and sell it, and then waste treatment the same way in agriculture. And so a lot of utilities don't necessarily want it. It's not the best quality gas that's out there. It takes some money to clean it up, scrub it. But again, versus putting it to the atmosphere as a greenhouse gas, it's capture it, blend it, mix it with your existing sources of natural gas, and then move that in the pipeline. But then that brings other issues of impurities and qualities, and what effects does that have on the piping network itself and some of the fittings and meters and so on and so forth. So it's a lot of work in that area. I won't get into all the detail, but the key part of it with what's happening now is when we went out and found leaks, Before it was just grading. The key part of when we picked up a surface indication, whether we were walking or whether we were driving in a mobile vehicle, we picked up the indication. The key part was to take handheld technology, go out in the field and basically verify where that leak is, bar hole, with subsurface sampling, and determine hazard, with grading. It's either an immediate hazard, grade 1, that requires immediate attention to eliminate, the hazard. There's a grade 2 that most companies, would then fix it within 6 months in most cases. And then there was a grade 3, which under the current regulation, didn't have to be repaired at all. Technically, you could go back every, once a year and reevaluate that leak and see if that leak has changed at all, if it's still a grade 3 leak or if it's got larger. This is where the environmentalists got in and say, well, why wouldn't you fix it? Well, see, in a lot of cases, utilities were planning a number of these grade 3 leaks to be replaced through piping. And so why go in, particularly if it's cast iron and it's bell joints and they're very small leaks that create no hazard, they're non-hazardous leak. The idea was eventually they were gonna go in and replace that pipe and knock out, a dozen or so of these smaller leaks at one time. So why go in and spend the money and fix each leak individually when we're going to replace the pipe anyways? And so that was part of management. Unfortunately, what's happening now out of this new requirement under this LDAR NPRM GPAC is now they're going to put a quantification piece on that. So what they're looking to do, it's more than just grading the leak, it's also quantifying the leak. In other words, how much is that leak actually leaking from a flow rate standpoint? And so they're looking to put some regulations on some of these leaks that, like if it's a grade 2 leak and it's 10 skiff or more, you will fix it now. So that's 10 standard feet an hour. You will make the repair, irregardless of what the class is, even though it's not a hazardous leak. We all know that leaks are like real estate. You can take a leak out in the middle of a cornfield in Iowa based on the size of that leak and being no structure around. Take that same leak and put it in downtown Manhattan up against the side of a building. Even though the leaks are the same and the flow rates are the same, the difference of the out in the middle of Iowa cornfield next to a building in New York City now changes that requirement from potentially a grade 2 or 3 to a grade 1 in immediate repair, just because of location, and the way it's set up. But the other piece that'll be added now is this flow rate quantification. And so that utilities will then have to report back, on how many leaks they have out there and what actually is the cumulative total of lost gas. And so a lot happening there. There's also other requirements out here now on the technology, and we'll get into some of that more. You'll hear about 5 ppm or 5 ppm-m sensitivity. So people will have to then determine the equipment they're using today, does it meet the new requirements on the sensitivity side? So they're also looking on class 1 and class 2 transmission lines as to, right now they don't have to do instrumented survey on those types of transmission lines. A lot of them are flown and they visually look. And so there's new requirements now that won't allow vegetation survey anymore. They'll have to use instrumented survey. So a number of changes coming down, and these pressures have come, a lot of it from the environmental side of the group that isn't looking at it necessarily from the safety side of it. They're looking at from the greenhouse gas side. So we, as in the utility industry, always looked at it from safety. Safety, safety, safety. We never wanted to have a leak out there that could migrate, cause ignition, and property loss or loss of life. And so that was always our number one concern. Now it's pushed even more heavily on the environmental side. So what I want to do is Heath came up with kind of what we're talking about, our layers. We call it our layers of protection. And so we've got what we call it is layers. So here's the pipe below. And so we don't really care what's in that pipe. Obviously if it's natural gas with a blend of renewable gas, from landfills or other sources, it could even be hydrogen, a blend of it. And so whether it's 100% natural gas, whether it's a blend of some renewable, whether we actually at some point in time start blending hydrogen 5% up to say 20%, whatever's in that pipe, the key is to have technology to be able to detect leaks. And so when we talk about layers, the one layer is odorant. We've always used odorant. We put odorant in the gas, not for us as utility people, but for the public. We have gas detectors. we have knowledge, we have understanding of how to investigate leaks. The public does not. The public has their nose, unless they have a residential methane detector, which you'll hear more about in the next 2 days as well. But they have their nose, that's it. That's their only leak detector. And so that continues. But what's happening is we've got older population now. Their sense of smell isn't necessarily what it used to be. We've got a lot of things that have come out of post-COVID, where people that did get COVID have issues smelling. There's other issues where people smell the gas, but not sure what it is. And even in all the public awareness that we do as an industry, educating the public on when they smell that rotten egg smell to make the call, people aren't making the call. You know, why? Not sure. And so there's just a lot of issues. So that's a layer. Then there's the leak investigation. When they do smell the gas, you follow up, you go and do a leak investigation, you determine where the leak is, you know, inside the property, outside, wherever that leak is. The third one is we do compliance walking surveys. So we go out and we do walking surveys on a 5-year, 3-year, and that's gonna change. It's gonna go from 5 to 3-year, and you'll hear later today a 1-year in the state of Nevada, and you'll hear, you know, and some of the reasoning behind that. Then we've got advanced mobile. You're going to hear a lot about that, is more advanced leak detection from a mobile standpoint. You're going to hear about that as well. Residential methane detectors, I talked about that. You'll hear that from Con Edison today on their program with residential methane detectors. There's fixed point sensors. More of these are on the upstream side at the well pad, but now we're seeing more you know, on the distribution side as well, is placing sensors strategically at high occupancy buildings, you know, churches, hospitals, daycare centers. So these are ideas that if there is a release of gas in around the metering infrastructure underground, a sensor would pick it up and bay it. So we're seeing a lot of that activity happen. There's drones, you know, you hear about that. It's out there. Some of these we're just partnering with companies on. There's fixed wing and helicopter. You see a lot of that. And what you're also hearing a lot now, and we're partnering with a lot of the satellite companies out there now, is, you know, how good are these satellites? Can they see the levels of leaks? Right now they can't see what you're seeing on the ground with ground-based technologies, but they're continuing to improve the technology. Then we're just trying to see how that might fit. But the idea is that it's kind of like the Swiss cheese model. You know, if you've got a leak, and, you know, you've got all these different layers along the way that hopefully would pick up the indication before you had, you know, a catastrophic incident. So I've got a little video here I'll play. Hopefully it'll play.
The layered approach to leak monitoring is designed to provide multiple layers of protection in the event of a natural gas leak, not relying on any one system or person to decide to take action. These layers include odorant, customer service leak and odor investigation, walking compliance surveys, advanced mobile, residential methane detectors, fixed point sensors, drones, fixed wing or helicopter, and satellites. When a natural gas leak does happen, these layers of systems alert multiple parties that take action, protecting life, property, and the environment from a potentially catastrophic event. Let's break down the layers of protection in the following scenario leak. Our leak is first picked up by the Discover Advanced Mobile Leak Detection Survey System, which is designed to be driven on a predetermined route and search for indications of escaping methane. If Discover receives a positive indication, the reading is displayed on the vehicle's laptop. Methane is also detected inside the house, which is equipped with a residential methane leak detector and an external stationary methane monitor down the street from the house. Each of these technologies send their specific readings and data about where the leak may have been detected to a central monitoring station. The data is logged and recorded within Heath's Leak Survey Analytics, or LSA for tracking. Several layers of protection are now reporting that there is a leak in this area. A customer service leak and odor investigation technician is dispatched to the proper location to pinpoint the leak with the proper equipment. After the technician confirms the purpose of his arrival at the location with the homeowner who smelled the gas, the technician continues to locate the leak using a Remote Methane Leak Detector Complete Solution, or RMLD-CS, while a second technician scans the general area with a drone for additional leak indications. Once the leak location has been determined, the technician will use the Detectopack Infrared Plus, or DP-IR Plus. In addition, the technician uses a plunger bar to bar hold the area to pinpoint the leak location for classification to identify any necessary follow-up repairs. The information collected from both technicians is logged into LSA for tracking and documentation purposes. After the repairs have been made by the local utility, monitoring of this neighborhood will continue, using all previous layers of protection as well as compliance walking surveys and possible aerial surveys with helicopter and fixed-wing aircraft, not to mention monitoring from far above with satellites, making your protection by Heath Consultants out of this world.
So what you'll hear through the course of today is our kind of really with how we intend to utilize our advanced mobile leak detection. And like I said, there are different competitive units out there around the world that have come on the market, recently. But will be our approach, and our technology. The way we approach it is a little bit different than some of the competitive units that are out there, and so we will talk about it. But the key is, to collect the data as we're doing the driving. Is collecting the data on whatever the frequency of driving is. Depending on the jurisdiction within your area, collecting and analyzing the data. In other words, now with a more sensitive unit, where instead of conventional parts per million, now we're running parts per billion. So we're extremely more sensitive, and so we're gathering much more data points. And so how do you utilize all those data points, and how do you analyze all those data points? And you got to remember now that you're picking up more than what's on, your side of the meter. Some of this is beyond the meter now with the sensitivity. And so how do you handle those kind of things where there are apartment complexes or master meters or other types of piping networks, downstream of the meter, and how that all gets affected now that you're running around a community with more sensitive equipment. So that's critical. And then the other piece is once you do process that data, then how do you follow up on these indications? How do you determine, where some of the how do you prioritize some of these indications to get to first in the event that it's, a major potential hazardous leak? And so we'll get into a little bit on how we go out and investigate those and the tools that are used to go out and do a more thorough investigation. The key is the find rate. When you start collecting all this data, and you've got all these data points, the idea is to have, a high find rate of these indications. And we're analyzing it, looking at for ethane, so we're determining, what's pipeline thermogenic gas versus bio-type gas. And so you're not out chasing your tail. And then this is where we need input from each of you is the reporting and what we provide back to you as a deliverable back to the utility company, and what's useful information for you to do other things. And we'll talk about some of that, how we're putting some AI and so on into some of that.